Here's a fact that should make your brain itch. Right now, at this very moment, you're watching a video on a device that runs on algorithms, speaking a language shaped by centuries of literature, living in a world transformed by the power of the written word. And if I asked you to name the writers who built this literary world, you'd probably rattle off the usual names: Shakespeare, Hemingway, Twain, Fitzgerald. But what if I told you that some of the most revolutionary, groundbreaking, world-changing writers in American history were deliberately erased? Not lost, not forgotten, erased. Their books burned, their newspapers destroyed, their names scrubbed from history books, their bodies buried in unmarked graves. I'm talking about Black writers, poets, novelists, journalists, revolutionaries of the pen, and today we're bringing them back. We live in a civilization that claims to celebrate genius, that claims to honor those who push humanity forward through art, through literature, through the raw power of words on a page. But here's what they don't tell you in English class. While your teachers were assigning Moby Dick and The Great Gatsby, there were Black writers who published first, who innovated first, who sacrificed everything for the written word. And instead of being celebrated, they were silenced. Their contributions credited to the wrong people, buried in footnotes, or simply stolen. Welcome to Arc of Ages. I'm your host, Max Winkler, and what we're about to uncover is going to change everything you thought you knew about American literature. What we're about to do here isn't just recite a list of names. We're not here to give you a history lesson you'll forget by tomorrow. No, we're reconstructing reality. Think of this as an archaeological excavation. We're digging through layers of institutional racism, through decades of deliberate erasure, through the rubble of destroyed newspapers and burned manuscripts, to unearth 10 writers whose words threatened the very foundations of white supremacy. 10 writers whose genius was so undeniable, so powerful, so dangerous that the only way to stop them was to pretend they never existed. Over the next 2 hours, you're going to meet the first Black person to publish a poem in America, buried in an unmarked grave. The first Black woman to publish a novel, forgotten for over a century. A journalist so dangerous, a mob destroyed her newspaper and put a bounty on her head. A Harlem Renaissance star who died penniless in a welfare home, her grave lost to the weeds. By the end of this video, you're going to be angry. You should be. But more importantly, you're going to be armed with knowledge they never wanted you to have, and you're going to know their names. Picture this. It's Christmas Day, 1760. The American Revolution is still 15 years away. George Washington is a 28-year-old surveyor. The Declaration of Independence hasn't been written. And on a plantation estate in Long Island, New York, a man is about to make history. His name is Jupiter Hammon. He's 49 years old. He's been enslaved his entire life. And tonight, on this Christmas Eve, he's writing something that will change American literature forever. An 88-line poem called An Evening Thought salvation by Christ with penitential cries. When that poem was published as a broadside in 1761, Jupiter Hammon became the first African American to publish poetry in what would become the United States. Not second, not one of the first. The first. Let that sink in for a moment. Before the Revolution, before the Constitution, before this was even a country, a black man in chains was writing poetry that would be read across the colonies. Now here's what makes Jupiter Hammon's story even more remarkable. He wasn't just a poet. He was a man of extraordinary intellect. The Lloyd family, his enslavers, allowed him access to their library. He learned to read and write. He became so skilled that he worked as a bookkeeper and negotiator for the family's business operations. Think about that. Here's a man considered property under the law, running the books for one of Long Island's wealthiest families. But Jupiter's true passion was the written word. After that first poem, 17 years would pass before his second publication. But when it came, it was addressed to another groundbreaking black poet. In 1778, Hammon published an address to Miss Phillis Wheatley, a poem honoring the young woman we'll talk about later in this video. 21 stanzas, each paired with a Bible verse celebrating a fellow literary pioneer. Here was a man in chains reaching across the colonies to acknowledge another black writer, building community, building legacy, even from inside the prison of enslavement. But Jupiter Hammon's most important work came in 1787. The Revolutionary War was over. America was now a nation built on the rhetoric of freedom and liberty, while millions remained enslaved. At 76 years old, Jupiter Hammon stood before the African Society of New York and delivered an address to the Negroes of the state of New York. In that address, he called for gradual emancipation. He spoke of the deaths of black men who had fought and died in the Revolution. He planted seeds for the abolitionist movement that would flower decades later. His words so powerful that the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery reprinted and distributed his speech across the country. So why don't you know his name? Because when Jupiter Hammon died, sometime around 1806, at approximately 95 years old, he was still enslaved, and he was buried in an unmarked grave on the Lloyd family property. No headstone, no monument, no marker to tell the world that here lay the first black poet in American history. For over 200 years, most Americans have never heard his name. Most literature textbooks skip right over him. Ask 100 people who the first black poet was, and they'll guess wrong. That's not an accident. That's a choice. A choice to erase a voice that proved, even in chains, black Americans were creating art, were creating literature, were contributing to the very soul of this nation. Recently, scholars have discovered previously unknown poems by Hammon. One found at Yale University in 2011, another at the New York Historical Society in 2015. After more than 2 centuries, we're still uncovering his work. Jupiter Hammon, born into slavery, died in slavery, but in between he became immortal. Remember that name. Picture this. It's 1761. A ship called the Phillis has just arrived at the Boston docks. In its hold are what the merchants called refugee slaves, Africans too young, too old, or too frail for the brutal plantation labor of the Caribbean. Among them is a little girl. She's about 7 years old. She's been ripped from her home in Senegal or Gambia. She survived the nightmare of the Middle Passage, and she's about to be sold. A wealthy Boston merchant named John Wheatley purchases her as a servant for his wife. They name her after the ship that stole her from Africa, Phillis Wheatley. Within 16 months of arriving in Boston, speaking no English, having no formal education, Phillis Wheatley could read and write fluently. By age 12, she was reading Latin. She was studying astronomy, geography, and history. She was devouring the works of Homer, Virgil, and Alexander Pope. By age 14, she was writing poetry that would stun the literary world. But here's where the silencing begins. When Phillis Wheatley tried to publish her poetry, colonial America said no. American printers refused to believe that an enslaved African girl could produce such sophisticated work. It must be a hoax. It must be a lie. It was simply impossible. So, in 1772, Phillis Wheatley was put on trial, not for a crime, not for rebellion, for poetry. 18 of Boston's most prominent citizens assembled to interrogate this young black woman. Among them, the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, John Hancock, whose signature would later grace the Declaration of Independence, ministers, poets, merchants, slaveholders. They questioned her. They tested her. They demanded she prove that she, a black girl, enslaved, African-born, could actually write the words attributed to her. Imagine that. Imagine being 20 years old, standing before a room of powerful white men, your very humanity on trial, having to prove that your genius is real. Phillis Wheatley passed their test. The 18 men signed an attestation, a letter confirming that, yes, this enslaved black woman really did write these poems. That letter had to be included in every copy of her book, because even after she proved herself, the doubt never went away. In 1773, with the help of patrons in England, Phillis Wheatley published poems on various subjects, religious and moral. She became the first African American poet. She became the first African American and the first enslaved person to publish a book of poetry. George Washington praised her work. Benjamin Franklin met with her in London. She became an international celebrity. And here's what the history books leave out. After her enslavers died, Phillis Wheatley was freed. She married John Peters, a free black man. She tried to publish a second collection of poems in 1779. No one would support it. Despite putting out 6 advertisements, she couldn't find enough subscribers. America, the land that had marveled at her genius, refused to buy her books. By 1784, Phillis Wheatley was working as a scullery maid in a boarding house, scrubbing floors. The same hands that had written poetry, praised across 2 continents, now raw, rough from menial labor. On December 5th, 1784, Phillis Wheatley died. She was 31 years old. She died alone, in poverty. Her husband was in debtor's prison across 2 continents. On December 5th, 1784, Phillis Wheatley died. She was 31 years old. She died alone, in poverty. Her husband was in debtor's prison. Her infant daughter died the same day she did. The woman who had charmed kings and corresponded with founding fathers, forgotten. Her second book of poems, lost forever. For decades, Phillis Wheatley was treated as a curiosity, a footnote, an anomaly. When later black writers and critics examined her work, some dismissed her as too accommodating, too religious, not revolutionary enough. But think of what she accomplished. She mastered a language forced upon her. She proved her genius before a tribunal designed to humiliate her. She published a book when the entire society said it was impossible, and she did it all while being owned like property. The real silencing of Phillis Wheatley wasn't just about ignoring her work. It was about America letting her die in poverty after celebrating her genius. She gave this country its first great black poet, and this country gave her pauper's death. Phillis Wheatley, remember her name. Okay, pause. Let me talk to you for a second. We're 2 writers in, and I can already hear what some of you are thinking. Why didn't I learn this in school? How is this possible? Why are they hiding this? And the answer? They erased these writers because their very existence was a threat. Every poem Jupiter Hammon wrote, every line Phillis Wheatley published, proved that black people could create art at the highest level. And if that was true, how could anyone justify slavery? So they had to disappear. Now, if you're watching this and you're feeling something, anger, sadness, determination, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. Not for me. Do it for Jupiter Hammon. Do it for Phillis Wheatley. Do it for every writer we're about to uncover. Every like, every share, every comment helps this history reach more people, helps us push back against centuries of erasure. And drop a comment telling me which writer so far hits different for you. We've got 8 more writers to go, and it only gets more intense from here. The Civil War is still 2 years away. Uncle Tom's Cabin has been shocking readers for 7 years. The abolitionist movement is reaching fever pitch. And in Boston, Massachusetts, a 34-year-old black woman is about to do something that no black woman in America has ever done. She's going to publish a novel. Her name is Harriet E. Wilson. She was born free in Milford, New Hampshire in 1825. Her father was a black man, her mother possibly white. When she was 6 years old, her mother abandoned her at the door of a white family called the Haywards in the free North in New Hampshire. They worked her like a slave. They beat her. They denied her education except for 3 months of the year. They broke her body so badly she would suffer health problems for the rest of her life. And Harriet Wilson wrote it all down. In September 1859, a book appeared with a remarkable title, Our Nig, or Sketches from the Life of a Free Black, in a 2-story White House, North, showing that slavery's shadows fall even there. Read that subtitle again. This was revolutionary. At a time when abolitionists focused exclusively on Southern slavery, Harriet Wilson was saying, the North isn't innocent either. Free blacks suffer too. Don't pretend your hands are clean. In her preface, Wilson was painfully honest about why she wrote the book. She needed money. Her husband had abandoned her. Her son was sick. She was too ill to work. Writing this novel was her last desperate attempt to survive. And here's the tragedy. The novel probably sold fewer than 100 copies. It wasn't enough to save her. In February 1860, just 6 months after the novel was published, Harriet Wilson's son George died. He was 7 years old. He died in the same poorhouse where Harriet had been forced to leave him while she worked to earn money for his care. Why didn't the book sell? Because it made everyone uncomfortable. The white abolitionists didn't want to hear that racism existed in the North. They wanted simple stories of Southern villains and Northern heroes. Harriet Wilson gave them the truth, and the truth didn't sell. So the first novel by an African American woman in this country vanished, not banned, not burned, just forgotten. For over 120 years, no one even knew Harriet Wilson was black. Scholars who stumbled across Our Nig assumed it was written by a white author. The title was considered too crude, too racist for a black writer. It must be satire, they thought. It wasn't until 1982 that a scholar named Henry Louis Gates Jr. was shown the book in a Manhattan bookstore. He started digging. He found records, census data, marriage licenses, death certificates, and he proved that Harriet E. Wilson was indeed a black woman, that Our Nig was autobiographical, that this forgotten novel was, in fact, the first novel published by an African American woman in the United States. Think about that timeline. 1859 to 1982. For 123 years, the first black female novelist in America was erased, invisible, unknown. Before Gates' discovery, history books credited Frances Harper's Before Gates' discovery, history books credited Frances Harper's 1892 novel as the first by a black woman. They were 33 years too late. Harriet Wilson went on to live a remarkable second act. She became a spiritualist lecturer. She spoke on labor reform and women's rights. She married again to a man 17 years her junior. She even developed and sold a hair care product, one of the earliest known black-owned beauty products. She died in 1900 at age 75, having no idea that one day her novel would be recognized as a landmark of American literature. In 2006, a statue of Harriet Wilson was unveiled in Milford, New Hampshire. A historical marker was dedicated in 2023. But for over a century, America had no idea she existed. Harriet E. Wilson, the first black female novelist. Remember her name. Picture this. It's 1893. In Dayton, Ohio, a young black man is earning $4 a week running an elevator in a downtown building, up and down, all day, every day. But between floors, when no passengers need him, he's writing poetry. His name is Paul Laurence Dunbar. He's 21 years old, and he's about to become the most celebrated black poet in American history. And then he's going to be trapped by his own success. Dunbar was born in 1872 in Dayton. His parents had been enslaved in Kentucky. His father, Joshua, escaped and served with the 55th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black units in the Civil War. Young Paul showed literary genius early. In high school, a predominantly white school, he was the only black student in his class. They elected him class president. They elected him class poet. His friends, Orville and Wilbur Wright. Yes, those Wright brothers. They helped Dunbar print his first newspaper, the Dayton Tatler. But after graduation, Dunbar couldn't find work that matched his talents. Racial discrimination locked every door except one, the elevator. So he became an elevator operator and a poet. In 1892, he convinced the Wright brothers to print his first collection, Oak and Ivy. He sold copies himself, right there in the elevator, for $1 each. Then came the breakthrough and the trap. Dunbar wrote poetry in two styles. He called them majors and minors. The majors were poems in standard English, beautiful, complex, philosophical poems about love, death, race, and justice. The minors were dialect poems, written in what we called Negro dialect, the speech patterns of black rural Southerners. In 1896, the famous critic William Dean Howells reviewed Dunbar's work in Harper's Weekly. He called Dunbar the first black American poet to show true literary mastery. And then Howells said something that would haunt Dunbar for the rest of his short life. Howells praised the dialect poems. He loved them. He commended them as the most authentic representation of black speech. The standard English poems, Howells barely mentions them. And just like that, Paul Laurence Dunbar was put in a cage. The white literary establishment wanted dialect. They wanted black characters talking in thick, quaint Southern accents. They wanted nostalgia for plantation life. That's what sold. That's what they published. That's what made Dunbar famous. Listen to what Dunbar himself wrote about this. His poem, The Poet. He sang of life with deep sincerity and occasional profound insight. He expressed the world's experience with skill and passion, but the world chose instead to praise what he called a mere jingle in a dialect tongue, a jingle in a broken tongue. He knew his greatest work was being ignored while audiences demanded his minor poems. When the interviewer asked him about it, Dunbar said, "I am tired, so tired of dialect." But the publishers didn't care. The audiences didn't care. They wanted what they wanted. Here's the deepest cut out of all. Later, black writers and critics, including some during the Harlem Renaissance, criticized Dunbar for his dialect poetry. They accused him of perpetuating stereotypes, of selling out. But they missed what was hidden in plain sight. Look closely at Dunbar's dialect poems, and you find subversion. You find pride. You find resistance coded in the very words that seem to mock black speech. His poem, We Wear the Mask, is one of the most powerful statements about black survival ever written. It speaks of wearing masks that grin and lie, while torn and bleeding hearts hide beneath, mouthing countless subtleties while the world remains oblivious to their pain. He was telling the world, this is what we do to survive. The dialect, the grins, the accommodation, it's a mask, and underneath we are bleeding. Paul Laurence Dunbar died on February 9, 1906. He was 33 years old, tuberculosis. The disease had been consuming him for years, worsened by the alcohol he used to cope with his demons. By the time he died, he published 6 volumes of poetry, 4 novels, and countless short stories. He has been celebrated in America and England. He had dined with Theodore Roosevelt, but he died believing he had failed, that his real work, The Majors, had been overlooked. The silencing of Paul Laurence Dunbar wasn't about hiding his work. It was about controlling what he was allowed to write, about praising the jingle while ignoring the genius. Today, scholars recognize his standard English poems as masterpieces, but for decades he was trapped in that cage of dialect. Paul Laurence Dunbar, a genius in chains of expectation. Remember his name. Picture this. It's 1892, Memphis, Tennessee. A young black woman is sitting in a newspaper office. She's reading the latest edition of her paper, the Free Speech and Headlight, the paper she co-owns, the paper she uses to speak truth to power. She's just written an editorial that's about to change her life forever, that's going to make her a target for assassination, that's going to burn this office to the ground. Her name is Ida B. Wells, and she's the most dangerous journalist in America. Ida B. Wells was born enslaved in Holly Springs, Mississippi in 1862. The Civil War had ended before she was 3, but that didn't mean freedom. At 16, her parents died in a yellow fever epidemic. 16 years old, and Ida became the provider for her 5 younger siblings. She worked as a school teacher, the only job available to her. But Ida B. Wells was nobody's quiet schoolmarm. In 1884, she was riding a train when the conductor ordered her to move from the first-class car she had paid for to the smoking car, the colored car. Ida refused. When the conductor tried to physically remove her, she bit him. They dragged her off the train. Ida sued the railroad, and she won. The court awarded her $500. Then the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the verdict, but Ida had found her calling. She started writing. Under the pen name Iola, Ida B. Wells wrote columns for black newspapers across the country. She was sharp. She was fearless. She was brilliant. Other journalists called her the Princess of the Press. By 1889, she had bought a partial ownership stake in the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight, a black-owned newspaper speaking directly to black readers. But it was 1892 that changed everything. On March 9, 1892, a white mob in Memphis lynched 3 black men. Their names were Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. Their crime? Running a successful grocery store. The People's Grocery was taking business away from a white-owned store across the street. And in Memphis in 1892, black success was a death sentence. Thomas Moss was Ida B. Wells' close friend, the godfather to her first child, and as he was being murdered, he reportedly said, "Tell my people to go west. There's no justice for them here." Ida B. Wells was destroyed, and then she got to work. She bought a gun for protection. She wrote editorials urging black people to leave Memphis. Thousands did. And then she did something even more dangerous. She started investigating. Ida B. Wells became one of America's first investigative journalists. She traveled to lynching sites. She interviewed witnesses. She gathered statistics. And she discovered a devastating truth. The common justification for lynching, that black men were rapists of white women, was a lie. Most lynching victims were accused of nothing sexual at all. They were killed for success, for land ownership, for voting, for simply existing as equals. And in many cases, where consensual relationships existed between black men and white women, it was the women who had pursued the relationships. Ida B. Wells wrote all of this and published it. The reaction was swift and murderous. On May 27, 1892, while Ida B. Wells was in Philadelphia, a mob stormed the offices of the Free Press and Speech. A mob stormed the offices of the Free Speech. They destroyed her printing press. They burned everything. They left a note threatening to lynch anyone who tried to restart the paper, and they put a price on Ida B. Wells' head. She was warned not to return to Memphis. They were watching the trains. White men were waiting with guns. Ida B. Wells became an exile from her own home, but they could not silence her. From New York, Ida B. Wells continued writing. She published Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases. She lectured across England and Scotland, bringing international attention to American terrorism. The New York Times attacked her character. They tried to discredit her, to shame her, to make her stop. It didn't work. Ida B. Wells moved to Chicago. She married Ferdinand Barnett, a lawyer and journalist who was just as committed to justice. She co-founded what would become the NAACP. She marched, she organized, she wrote, she never stopped. And here's what they tried to erase. Ida B. Wells was present at the founding meetings of the NAACP in 1909. She was one of only 2 black women invited, but when the organization formalized, she was pushed aside. She was too radical, too uncompromising. She made the white leadership uncomfortable. So they wrote her out. For decades, history remembered the male founders of the NAACP, while Ida B. Wells' role was minimized or forgotten. She died in 1931, still fighting. It took until 2020, 89 years after her death, for Ida B. Wells to receive a Pulitzer Prize, a special citation for her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. They tried to kill her. They burned her newspaper. They exiled her from her home. They wrote her out of organizations she helped create. And still her words survived. Ida B. Wells, the woman with the most dangerous pen in America. Remember her name. We're halfway through now, and I need to ask you something. Are you angry yet? Because I am. I'm angry that a journalist had to flee her home for telling the truth about lynching. I'm angry that a poet was forced to write in a dialect he hated because that's what white audiences wanted. I'm angry that the first black female novelist in America was forgotten for 123 years. I've been reading your comments from our videos on black scientists, from our video on hidden engineers. You keep asking the same question. How deep does this erasure go? It goes all the way down. Every field, every art form, every discipline. There are black pioneers who were silenced, stolen from, forgotten. But we're here to dig them up. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because we're building something here, a community of people who refuse to let this history stay buried. And speaking of communities that were destroyed, our next writer built her legacy in the heart of the Harlem Renaissance and died forgotten in a welfare home. Let's go. Picture this. It's 1925, New York City. A young black woman from Florida strides into an awards dinner sponsored by Opportunity magazine. She's wearing a bright scarf. She's talking loud. She's making sure everyone in the room knows she's there. When they announce the winners, she claims 4 awards: second place in fiction, second place in drama, 2 honorable mentions, and she enters the after party. She flings that scarf around her neck with dramatic flair and bellows, "Color struck!" the title of her winning play. That woman is Zora Neale Hurston, and she's about to become the brightest star of the Harlem Renaissance. And then America is going to let her die in poverty, in a welfare home, and bury her in an unmarked grave. Zora was born in 1891 in Alabama, but she grew up in Eatonville, Florida, one of the first all-black incorporated towns in America. No white people telling them how to live, no Jim Crow degradation at every turn. That experience of black self-governance, black pride, black community, it shaped everything she would write. After her mother died when she was 13, Zora's life became a struggle. She moved around. She worked odd jobs. She reinvented her age to qualify for free high school at 26. But through it all, she never stopped learning, never stopped writing. By 1928, she had graduated from Barnard College, the only black student having studied anthropology under the legendary Franz Boas. And she had a vision that no other writer of the Harlem Renaissance could match. Zora Neale Hurston didn't just write about black life. She studied it. She documented it. She traveled through the South collecting folklore, stories, songs, and traditions that were in danger of being lost forever. Her book, Mules and Men, was the first published collection of African American folklore gathered by an African American. She traveled to Haiti and Jamaica to study spiritual practices. She wrote about the African roots of black culture at a time when many black intellectuals were trying to prove their civilization by distancing themselves from Africa. And in 1937, she wrote her masterpiece, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Written in 7 weeks while Zora was doing anthropological research in Haiti, it tells the story of Janie Crawford, a black woman searching for love, identity, and freedom across 3 marriages in the early 20th century South. It's written in the dialect and rhythm of black Southern speech. It celebrates black culture without apology. It centers a black woman's interior life at a time when black women were invisible in American literature. Today, it's considered one of the greatest American novels ever written. In 1937, it was attacked. Richard Wright, yes, the Richard Wright, who we'll talk about later, criticized her approach harshly. He said her novel had no theme, no message, no thought. Other black male intellectuals dismissed her as performing for white audiences. They wanted protest literature. They wanted anger. They wanted political messaging. Zora was doing something else entirely. She was celebrating black life, black love, black language, and that made them uncomfortable. White publishers began losing interest. Her later books didn't sell. By the 1950s, Zora Neale Hurston, The woman who had published 4 novels, 2 books of folklore, and an autobiography was working as a maid in Florida. In 1959, Zora suffered a stroke. She was admitted to the St. Lucie County Welfare Home, a facility for the indigent. On January 28, 1960, Zora Neale Hurston died. She was 69 years old, penniless, alone. Her neighbors in Fort Pierce had to take up a collection for her funeral. They raised about $600. It wasn't enough for her headstone. So the first black woman to graduate from Barnard College, the collector of irreplaceable African-American folklore, the author of one of the greatest novels in American history, was buried in an unmarked grave. Her books went out of print. Her name faded from memory. The genius of the Harlem Renaissance forgotten. For 13 years, Zora Neale Hurston lay in that unmarked grave, weeds growing over her resting place, snakes slithering through the cemetery. Then, in 1973, a young writer named Alice Walker traveled to Fort Pierce. Alice Walker, who would go on to write The Color Purple, was determined to find her literary foremother. She waded through waist-deep weeds. She called out Zora's name in the cemetery, and she found her. Alice Walker bought a headstone. She had it inscribed, Zora Neale Hurston, a genius of the South. In 1975, Walker published an essay in Ms. Magazine, In Search of Zora Neale Hurston. It sparked a revival. Their Eyes Were Watching God was republished. It became a bestseller. It entered the literary canon. Today, it's taught in high schools and universities across the country. But think about those 13 years. Think about how close we came to losing her completely. If not for Alice Walker, if not for one young black woman who refused to let another black woman's genius die, Zora Neale Hurston would be no one. Alice Walker wrote, "A people do not throw their geniuses away. If they do, it is our duty as witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children, if necessary, bone by bone." Zora Neale Hurston, the genius who died forgotten, remember her name. Picture this. It's the summer of 1919. America is burning in what historians call the Red Summer. White mobs are attacking black communities across the nation. Chicago, Washington, D.C., dozens of cities. Black men are being lynched. Black homes are being burned. Black blood is running in American streets. And in the office of the Liberator magazine, a Jamaican immigrant is writing a poem that will become a battle cry. His name is Claude McKay. He's 29 years old, and he's about to write one of the most important poems in African American history, If We Must Die. The poem calls for resistance in the face of murderous violence. It demands that if death is coming, it be met not with cowering submission, but with courage and dignity. It insists that the oppressed fight back against those who would destroy them. The poem exploded across Black America. It was read in barbershops and churches. It was printed in black magazines from coast to coast. During World War II, Winston Churchill would quote it to rally the British against Nazi Germany without even mentioning it was written by a black man. Claude McKay had just ignited the Harlem Renaissance, but the Harlem Renaissance couldn't hold him. McKay was born in 1889 in Jamaica, the son of farmers who were proud of their African heritage. His older brother introduced him to books. A British folklorist named Walter Jekyll taught him poetry and philosophy. By the time he arrived in America in 1912, McKay was already a published poet, but what he found here shocked him. The racism, the violence, the everyday humiliation of Jim Crow. Jamaica had its own problems, but nothing like this. In America, being black could get you killed for just walking down the wrong street. McKay joined radical political movements. He became a communist. He traveled to the Soviet Union. He lived in Paris, Marseille, Morocco for over a decade. He was looking for a place where he could be both black and free. He never found it. In 1928, McKay published Home to Harlem, a novel about a black soldier returning from World War I to the vibrant, gritty life of Harlem. It became a bestseller, the first novel by a black author to top the charts, and it made enemies. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most respected black intellectuals in America, attacked McKay's novel. He said reading it made him feel like he needed a bath. Too much sex, too much vice, too much of the wrong kind of black life. McKay didn't flinch. He called the Harlem Renaissance a hopeless mess. He criticized its leaders for telling black artists what they could and couldn't write. He wanted to portray black life as it was, messy, beautiful, complicated, real, not sanitized for white audiences, not reduced to propaganda. But his independence came at a cost. When McKay broke with the Communist Party in the 1930s, he was tired of being told what to think, what to write. Both the communists and the black establishment turned on him. Langston Hughes, once a close friend, distanced himself. McKay returned to America in 1934. After 12 years abroad, the Harlem Renaissance was over, killed by the Great Depression. His old allies were gone. He drifted. He struggled. He converted to Catholicism in 1942, searching for spiritual peace. And when he died in 1948, at 58 years old, Claude McKay was nearly forgotten. Here's the silencing that happened to Claude McKay. He was too radical for the mainstream. He was too independent for the radicals. He criticized the Harlem Renaissance while being its pioneer. He wrote about black sexuality and pleasure at a time when black bodies were supposed to be tools of labor or objects of pity. For decades, literary scholars couldn't figure out where to put him. He was left out of the canon. It wasn't until recently, with the discovery of 2 unpublished novels in archives, that we've begun to understand just how vast his genius was. One of those novels, Amiable with Big Teeth, was found at Columbia University in 2012. It wasn't published until 2017, 70 years after his death. Another, Romance in Marseille, wasn't published until 2020, a complete novel sitting in an archive for nearly a century. Think about that. Major works by a foundational American author hidden away for decades. Claude McKay, the rebel who belonged nowhere. Remember his name. Picture this. It's 1940. A novel has just been published that will change American literature forever. It's called Native Son. Its protagonist is Bigger Thomas, a young black man in Chicago who commits a terrible crime. The Book of the Month Club has selected it. It sells 250,000 copies in the first month. It's the fastest-selling Harper novel in 20 years. The author is Richard Wright, and he has just dropped a bomb on white America's conscience. Richard Wright was born in 1908 on a plantation near Natchez, Mississippi. His father was a sharecropper. His mother was a schoolteacher. By the time he was 10, his father had abandoned the family. Richard and his mother moved from town to town, barely surviving. He never finished high school, but Richard Wright had a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by food. He discovered books, sneaked into the whites-only section of the library using a borrowed card, devoured H.L. Mencken, Theodore Dreiser, Dostoevsky, taught himself the craft of writing. And he watched black men being lynched. He saw the everyday terror of being black in the Jim Crow South. He saw how fear and oppression warped the human soul, and he wrote it all down. In Chicago, Wright joined the Communist Party. He found community. He found a philosophy that seemed to explain the oppression he had witnessed. His first book, Uncle Tom's Children, in 1938, was a collection of novellas about black life in the rural South. It was raw, it was violent, it was revolutionary. And then came Native Son. Bigger Thomas was not a sympathetic character. He's a product of racism, warped, angry, violent. He kills a white woman, then kills his black girlfriend to cover it up. Wright wasn't asking for pity. He was showing white America what their society had created. Literary critic Irving Howe wrote that the day Native Son appeared, American culture changed permanently. Old lies could no longer be repeated. In 1945, Wright published Black Boy, his autobiography about growing up in the Jim Crow South. Another bestseller, another bomb. But there was a part of that book that wasn't published until decades later. Wright had written a second section about his time in Chicago and his experiences with the Communist Party. The publishers cut it. Too controversial, too dangerous. The full book, called American Hunger, wasn't published until 1977, 17 years after Wright's death. They literally cut his story in half, and it got worse. Wright broke with the Communist Party in 1942. He was tired of being told what to think, what to write. He published an essay called I Tried to Be a Communist in the Atlantic Monthly. Now he had enemies on all sides. The communists attacked him as a traitor. The FBI began surveying him. They compiled an extensive file on Richard Wright. They followed him. They intercepted his mail. They saw him as a threat. Senator Bilbo of Mississippi publicly denounced him as a liar. And even within the black literary community, younger writers were starting to turn on the techniques Wright had pioneered. James Baldwin, who Wright had mentored, published essays criticizing Native Son as a protest novel that reduced black life to sociology. By 1946, Richard Wright had had enough. He moved his family to Paris. He became an exile. From France, he continued to write. He published The Outsider in 1953, one of the first American existentialist novels. He traveled to Africa and Asia, writing about colonialism and the rise of independent nations. But the literary establishment in America moved on without him. His later novels were dismissed. Critics said he had lost touch with Black America. The FBI continued monitoring him, even in Paris. On November 28, 1960, Richard Wright died in Paris. He was 52 years old. The cause was listed as a heart attack, though there have been speculations about the circumstances. The silencing of Richard Wright happened in stages. First, they cut out his books. Major sections of Black Boy weren't published until after he died. A novel called The Man Who Lived Underground, which he wrote in 1941, wasn't published full until 2021, 80 years after he wrote it. Then they pushed him aside. The writer who had changed American literature was treated as out of date, out of touch, yesterday's news, and it surveilled him, made him feel watched, made exile feel like the only option. Richard Wright wrote about what white supremacy does to the human soul, and white supremacy and the systems that support it made sure to punish him for it. Richard Wright, the exile who never stopped writing, remember his name. Picture this, it's 1854. A 29-year-old Black woman stands on a platform in New Bedford, Massachusetts. She's about to give her first public lecture for the Anti-Slavery Society of Maine. This is a dangerous time to be an abolitionist. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 means anyone who helps an escaped slave can be imprisoned. Speaking out against slavery can cost you everything. But Frances Ellen Watkins has never been afraid to speak. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was born free in Baltimore in 1825, the same year as Harriet Wilson. Orphaned by age 3, she was raised by her uncle, an abolitionist minister who ran a school for free Black children. By age 14, she was working as a domestic servant, but she never stopped learning, never stopped writing. In 1845, at just 20 years old, Frances published her first book of poetry, Forest Leaves. Today, no copies are known to survive. That's the first erasure. Her first book, lost to history. But Frances Ellen Watkins was not so easily silenced. In 1854, she joined the abolitionist lecture circuit. She traveled across the northern states, speaking to crowds, white and Black, about the horrors of slavery. She was one of the most powerful orators of her era. That same year, she published Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects, with an introduction by William Lloyd Garrison, the most famous white abolitionist in America. It sold 10,000 copies in 3 years. It was reprinted at least 20 times. Frances Ellen Watkins became the most popular Black poet since Phillis Wheatley, and then she kept going. In 1859, the same year Harriet Wilson published Our Nig, Frances published a short story called The Two Offers in a Black periodical. It was the first short story published by an African American woman in the United States. She wrote essays, she wrote letters, she wrote speeches. She was a founding member of the American Woman Suffrage Association. She worked with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. In 1892, at age 67, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper published her most ambitious work, Iola Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, a novel about a biracial woman during and after the Civil War. For almost a century, literary scholars believed this was the first novel published by an African American woman. But remember what we learned earlier? Harriet Wilson published Our Nig in 1859, 33 years before Iola Leroy. When Henry Louis Gates Jr. rediscovered Wilson in 1982, it rewrote literary history. Harper wasn't first, she was second. And somehow in the rewriting, Harper herself began to fade. Because here's what happened. Once scholars knew there was a first black female novelist before Harper, they focused on Wilson. The woman who had been known as the pioneer became just another name on the list. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper died in 1911 at age 85. She had published 11 books. She had given hundreds of lectures. She had fought for abolition, women's suffrage, and temperance. Today, how many people know her name? The silencing of Frances Ellen Watkins is especially cruel. For 100 years, she was credited as the first black female novelist. That alone should have made her a permanent fixture in American literary classes. But when history was corrected, when Wilson was discovered, Harper was quietly pushed aside. Instead of celebrating both women, the literary establishment chose a new first and forgot about the woman who had been celebrated before. She was used and discarded, a placeholder in literary history until someone more interesting came along. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, the voice that was first until she wasn't. Remember her name. We've arrived at number 1, and I need you to pay attention, because this man's story encompasses everything we've talked about: genius, erasure, resilience, and the systematic silencing of black voices. Picture this. It's 1814, near Lexington, Kentucky. A child is born into slavery. His mother is an enslaved woman named Elizabeth. His father, most likely the white man who owns them both. That child will escape slavery. He will teach himself to read. He will become a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and he will become the first black American to publish a novel. His name is William Wells Brown. William's life in slavery was brutal. He was hired out, sold, separated from his mother. He worked on riverboats on the Mississippi, where he witnessed horrors that would haunt his writing for the rest of his life. In 1834, at age 20, he escaped, made his way to the free North, was helped by a Quaker named Wells Brown, whose name he took as his own, and then he got to work. William Wells Brown became a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He helped more than 60 enslaved people reach freedom. He became a lecturer for the Anti-Slavery Society. He traveled across America and Europe, speaking about the evils of slavery, and he wrote. In 1847, he published his autobiography, Narrative of William Wells Brown, a fugitive slave, written by himself. It sold out rapidly. It was reprinted 4 times in its first year. It became one of the most influential slave narratives ever published. But that was just the beginning. In 1853, William Wells Brown published Clotel, or The President's Daughter. It was the first novel ever published by an African American. Read that again. The first novel. Not the first by a woman, not the first in a particular region, the first, period. And what was it about? It told the fictionalized story of the mixed-race children of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Yes, in 1853, while Jefferson's white descendants were still denying any such relationship, a formerly enslaved black man published a novel exploiting the sexual exploitation at the heart of American slavery. The book was published in London. Brown was living in England at the time. He had fled there because the Fugitive Slave Act made it dangerous for him to remain in America. He couldn't return to the United States until 1854, when British abolitionists raised enough money to purchase his freedom from his former enslaver. Think about that. The first black American novelist had to have his freedom purchased so he could come home. And even then, his novel wasn't published in America until 1864, and in a heavily revised version. The references to Jefferson were removed. They literally censored the first black American novel. But William Wells Brown wasn't finished. In 1858, he wrote The Escape, or A Leap for Freedom, the first play published by an African American. He wrote history books, travel writing, medical manuals. He was a doctor, a playwright, a historian, a novelist, an autobiographer, a lecturer. He was quite simply one of the most accomplished American writers of the 19th century. And today, most people have never heard his name. The silencing of William Wells Brown happened through simple neglect. His first novel wasn't widely available in America for decades. Literary scholars focused on white writers. The African American literary tradition was treated as a footnote. When William Louis Gates Jr. and other scholars began recovering black literature in the late 20th century, they had to reintroduce William Wells Brown to the world, the first black American novelist, forgotten for over a century. William Wells Brown died in 1884. He was 70 years old. He had spent his entire adult life fighting for freedom, his own and that of his people. He escaped slavery. He helped others escape. He wrote the truth when the truth could get you killed. And then America forgot him. William Wells Brown, the first of everything. Remember his name. 10 writers, 10 voices, 10 geniuses who changed the world. Jupiter Hammon, the first published black poet, buried in an unmarked grave. Phillis Wheatley, the poet who proved her genius before 18 white men, died in poverty at 31. Harriet E. Wilson, the first black female novelist, forgotten for 123 years. Paul Laurence Dunbar, the poet trapped in a cage of dialect, his greatest work overlooked. Ida B. Wells, the journalist so dangerous they burned her newspaper and exiled her from her home. Zora Neale Hurston, the genius of the South who died in a welfare home and was buried in an unmarked grave. Claude McKay, the rebel who started the Harlem Renaissance and died nearly forgotten. Richard Wright, the exile whose books were cut, censored, and unpublished for decades. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, the voice they thought was first, then quietly pushed aside. And William Wells Brown, the first of everything, who fought for freedom and was erased from memory. These weren't just writers. They were warriors on two fronts. They fought against the institution of slavery. They fought against Jim Crow. They fought against the lie that black people were incapable of art, of literature, of genius, and they won. Their words survived. Their books endure. Their voices, silenced for decades or centuries, are being heard again. And here's what keeps me up at night. How many more are out there? How many black writers never got their work published? How many manuscripts were burned, destroyed, lost to time? How many geniuses died without ever being recognized? We'll never know. That's the cruelest part of erasure. Some voices are lost forever, but the ones we can recover, we must recover. That's what we're doing here. That's what this community is about. We don't just learn history, we excavate it. We dig through the layers of lies and find the truth buried underneath. You know their names now. Jupiter Hammon, Phillis Wheatley, Harriet E. Wilson, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Ida B. Wells, Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay, Richard Wright, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, William Wells Brown. You're not going to let them be forgotten again. Here's what I need from you. In the comments right now, and I mean right now, tell me, which writer's story hit you the hardest? Which one are you going to read first? Because the best way to honor these writers is to read their words. Go to your library, search their names, pick up their books. Harriet Wilson's Our Nig, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, Richard Wright's Native Son, Ida B. Wells' The Red Record. Read them, talk about them, share them, and share this video. Every like, every share, every comment pushes back against centuries of erasure, helps this history reach people who've never heard it. If you haven't already, subscribe to Arc of Ages. Turn on that notification bell. We're just getting started. We've covered black scientists, black engineers, black filmmakers, black writers, and there's so much more to uncover. This is a movement, a community of people dedicated to excavating the truth. You're not just a viewer. You're not just watching some videos and moving on. You're part of a community that's rewriting history, that's refusing to let genius be erased, that's saying to the forces of silence, not anymore. Every comment you leave helps the algorithm show this to more people. Every share spreads the truth to someone who's never heard it. Every subscription tells YouTube that this content matters. We are bending the arc of history towards truth, and we are doing it together. Alice Walker once wrote, "A people do not throw their geniuses away. If they do, it is our duty as witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children." That's what we're doing here, collecting our geniuses, bone by bone, name by name, story by story, until no one can ever erase them again. Before I let you go, I want you to do something. Close your eyes for just a moment. Say their names in your head. Jupiter Hammon, Phillis Wheatley, Harriet E. Wilson, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Ida B. Wells, Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay, Richard Wright, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, William Wells Brown. These were real people. They lived, they struggled, they created art of the highest order, and then they were silenced. But silence is not permanent, not when we refuse to accept it. Their words are still there. Their books are still in libraries. Their legacy is waiting to be claimed. Go claim it. I'm your host at Arc of Ages. Thank you for joining me on this excavation.